Well, hi, everyone. My name is Marianne Gouveia, and I'm one of the co-founders of Eric's House. And I'm here today with a very, very special person, Joe McMahon. Joe McMahon is in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area, and she saved my life, actually. She was my first person who helped me immediately after Eric died. And so I'm forever indebted to her for her support. But Jill is also a trauma and suicide loss specialist and has been working in the industry as a counselor for a long, long time. So we're so happy, Jill, that you're here. And thank you for being part of the Eric's House team.
You're welcome. Anything to support you guys and support all of those that are tuning in today and that benefit from your services.
So, Jill, I thought today we would talk about how to support someone after a suicide loss. And that's because many of our people kind of feel isolated. So we often hear this thing about, well, I had all these friends, but since my son died, all my friends have disappeared. And so I know there's a lot of stigma around it. Right. But I thought we could talk a little bit about how you could support someone who has lost someone they love to suicide, how you could support them and be their friend after the loss.
I actually love this topic, and I think that it's a really important topic that you guys are bringing into today's event or any day for that matter, on both sides. You know, I have worked with a survivor as well that every single time will say, my big circle got very, very small after I lost my family member and my loved one. The flip side is I've also coached friends and distant family members in helping those that are so affected and saddened. And they are just as much as a loss as well. So to me, this is a great conversation for both parties to hear. I would say the number one piece of advice that I would give to a friend or family member or coworker for that matter would be to be patient. Right? So what I have noticed is that fear actually determines how we respond to a survivor of suicide. And first and foremost, and I think Marianne, maybe you lived some of this, so you could agree, the survivor will often get phone calls and people knocking at their door just saying, what do you need? Tell me what you need. Right. And you and I both know that is the last question that they can answer. So, right? So maybe be patient and learn to change your expectations as the support system or the friend. Change your expectations. Let's just have no expectations of the individual that has experienced a traumatic loss. Right. Remember, they can't even remember how to tie their shoes.
Right.
Oftentimes they don't know how to dress themselves. They're forgetting to eat. And if you approach them lovingly with the question of, just tell me what you need, what can I do for you? They don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It almost creates a different kind of obligation. It's like, oh, these people are wanting to talk to me. They're wanting to help me, but I'm just trying to breathe. I'm just trying to breathe.
Yep. And then it leads to this feeling of failure in some way, right? I'm letting somebody else down because I can't answer that question or because I'm not returning their phone calls when really I'm just trying to remember how to breathe.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I like the fact that you brought it up that, we don't know what we need, especially immediately after and for months after, actually. I remember when Eric died, I have this big family, as you know, and I remember when Eric died, my sisters just came over. They didn't say a word. They started changing the sheets on the bed, cleaning up the house, doing some dusting.
There you go.
And I felt so supported just by that. Nobody really even needed to talk to me. It was just the solidarity of people being there, standing side by side with me, but not expecting anything of me.
I'm so glad that you used that example because that was going to be another trick of the trade that I was going to state. So you just led right into that. I have another client that I had worked with for years, and she said to me from day one that the most helpful person to her in the weeks or months after she lost her husband to suicide were the friends that brought the cooler of cold water to her house.
Right.
Just water bottles. She's like, the people that didn't ask me what I needed, but just showed up and did my laundry and brought water bottles, because she's like, I had a revolving door in some way for a few weeks of the meal train, you know, people that would drop off a casserole or people that would drop off whatever. And she's like, I always felt like when somebody stopped by, I needed to offer them something. So let's just stop and think about that for a minute. You are the griever, yet every time somebody stops by, you feel like you need to host them in some way, right?
Exactly.
That's just human nature. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, the funny thing, especially that first couple weeks, you hardly remember anything.
Yeah.
So you're just a zombie. You're just kind of like taking a step and taking a breath. And if you can just do those things, you know, you're doing okay.
Right.
You know, I wanted to, a lot of times, and even with me, even when I work with so many different people who have lost someone, sometimes I don't even know what to say to people. And I say, you know, that's what I do all day long is talk to people in their grief after these losses. So can you give, from your point of view, some tips on how to talk to somebody who's really in that acute stage of grief?
Keep it simple, right? Again, so human nature and our internal fear as those that are surrounding the griever, we want to do something, or we're scared, or we don't know what to say, or we're afraid we're going to say the wrong thing, or we are so desperate to help them. Sometimes we overreact. Keep it simple. What I've been told over and over again is just, I am so sorry for your loss. That's it. I am so sorry for your loss. You might be able to say, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Right. But there are, along in this conversation, is what not to say, right? There are those that, exactly. There are those that say, oh, I can imagine, and this is horrible. Well, I will tell you, a newly bereaved will be like internally, no, you can't imagine. No, you can't imagine, right? Or comparing. Comparing is one of the last things you want to do. Compare it to the loss of a grandparent. Believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, this happens. Compare their loss to something that has happened in your life. They can't digest that. They can't take that on. Did you experience any of that, Marianne?
Well, I did. I felt often like, well, the talking part became fatiguing for me.
Okay. Interesting. Why?
Yeah, because I didn't really have energy to talk. And I felt like I would have to console people who would talk to me.
Yes. Thank you.
I felt like I would have to console them, like, it's okay. We're going to get through this somehow. But really, that was just me saying, I can't talk.
Yeah. Right.
Because you can't even think, let alone talk.
Can I pause you right there? I'm going to pause you for just a second, because I think it's important for friends and family members that might be tuned in to remember that if that is the response you get, that's okay. That is not personal. You never meant that personal. I mean, if you didn't return a phone call, or if you had to, if you were minimal in your response or your conversation with somebody, that wasn't because you disliked them. It wasn't because you're upset with them. It was because, again, you were just trying to breathe. And the brain, you said it earlier, the brain completely misfires when you have experienced this level of trauma. I call it Swiss cheese brain. Of course, that's being half-hearted and being silly, but it is the best visual for people to understand. Trauma impacts your brain much like a concussion, but it's a concussion every minute of every hour of every day for weeks, if not months. If not months. So, for those who are attempting to help us, if they realize that the brain is working at like 30% capacity. So not to take anything personal that we may say or not say, or thank you cards that you are not receiving, or phone calls that are not being returned.
Yeah.
Please, it isn't about you at that moment. It's about us just not wanting to die.
Yeah.
In all honesty,
Yeah.
it's Tuesday, and I'm gonna try to stay alive Tuesday so that I can make it through Wednesday.
Right.
Does that sound
Exactly.
accurate?
Exactly. And you're doing that in the midst of all this
Yeah.
complex layers of
Yeah.
grief and emotions and relationships.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to touch on is sort of after you're past that big initial phase of really intense grief, you're starting to return to life.
Mm-hmm.
And people want things to go back to normal.
Mm.
And so people might say to you, and this is an example of what not to say. People might say to you, well, it has been 6 months.
Mm.
Don't you think you should be moving on now? Or we just want you to feel better. Or it was that person's choice to leave, and he was a grown man, so you should be getting back to your normal self. Those are all things that we hear, and they're all things that should be nowhere in the conversation.
Nowhere in the conversation. What about this one? I just want the old Marianne back again.
Yeah, I've heard it many times.
Yeah. It's so interesting how people really want to put a timeline on grief. And just because your mom handled a certain death in a certain way doesn't mean your best friend is going to handle it in the same way as well. I do think it's important to state, though, that yes, the griever is forever changed, but the core of who we are is still in there, right? So we
That's
are
right.
still lovable.
Right.
We are still lovable. You just need to be patient, and you just need to give us time. And maybe you need to get to know us in a different way, which again, I think makes the friend uncomfortable. Yeah. Right. So just kind of maybe look internally a little bit and say, how am I uneasy? Mm-hmm. And what if I just set that to the side? Maybe I'm grieving the loss of a friend to some extent right now. Maybe I feel ill-equipped to help her because I don't know what it's like to lose a child. And maybe that makes me uncomfortable. So maybe I've noticed that I'm backing away. And then don't demonize yourself for it by any means. Right. Just say, okay, what can I do differently? Maybe I need to give her some space and try again in 3 months.
Yeah, because we often hear that I'm afraid to bring it up. I'm afraid to talk about it. I'm afraid I'm going to hurt her. I'm afraid if I bring up her daughter's name that she's going to be triggered, and I just, it would break my heart if I hurt somebody, right? That's what we hear a lot. So what do you say? And I always advise people to just be genuine and just be honest. And another way to talk to a person is to talk about the one who passed away, and to let them know that, they're still present in my mind, in my life. And I'm going to talk about them, and I want to hear more about them from you. And just begin that process of sharing memories. I noticed that it's painful at first to do that. I know in my case, I really didn't want to talk about Eric. In fact, even years in, somebody asked me, tell me a funny story about Eric. I was like deer in the headlights.
Mm-hmm. Like, would you close up? Is that, how would you handle that when somebody made that comment to you?
Well, in that particular case, I just said, I'm not up for that right now. I'm just not up for that right now, because it was a deer in the headlight, because I was so deep in the fact that Eric died. Mm-hmm. Not how he died, but the fact that he died, that I was still processing that even a few years out.
Right.
That
and were you question, I'm sorry, but were you personally upset with that person for asking you?
No. Good. I was not upset. In fact, it was kind of a wake-up call for me personally, because it's like, oh, wait a minute. I do have a lot of really fun, interesting memories about Eric, but I was not ready to talk about it yet.
There you go.
I was still protecting myself. So when you're a person wanting to support a loss survivor, it's helpful to recognize that if they want to talk about their loved one, great, engage them and be a listener, a compassionate listener, and, share those memories. But if they don't, to your earlier point, Jill, don't take it personally.
Right.
That the time will come that they do want you to say their name and share memories. It's just such a delicate area of this loss experience.
So what's the lesson? It's kind of roll with the tide, right? Because the flip side of that's important to bring up as well, is you don't, if the person that you are trying to support brings up their loved one's name, don't let that scare you away. Right. So we're talking so much about, don't be afraid. I'm going to use you and Eric as an example, right? Don't be afraid to mention Eric to Marianne. And I will tell you, so many people are, and it's just out of love and protection, honestly. I've worked with so many families, and the surviving children will not want to bring up the family member's name that was lost to mom, because they believe that mom is hurting so much already anyway, and she's having a good day. So why would I bring up Eric's name to mom when she's having a good day? Because then I will feel responsible for changing her mood. And then I'm the bad person. And I don't want to make anybody unhappy. Yeah. When really, overwhelmingly, what I hear from survivors is, nobody will talk about my person anymore. And just because we lost them doesn't mean they were erased. It doesn't mean they never existed. We can't talk about, Halloween of 2005. I want nothing more than to talk about Halloween of 2005. So it's very painful oftentimes for the survivor. The flip side is, if you are the friend and the survivor or Marianne mentions Eric's name, don't let that shut you down because you're nervous and you don't know what to say. Take that as a cue of, oh, Marianne wants to talk about Eric. This is fantastic. This is my open door to start asking more questions about Eric, because this is where she is.
Yeah. And, it also creates a certain bond between you and the person you're talking with. Because some people, I think we all know early in the process, we quickly realize, oh my gosh, I can never talk to that person about this. Partly judgment, stigma, whatever. But then after the fact, we learn who we're comfortable speaking with it about. And then that becomes really helpful. Those people are far and few between.
So you all of a sudden become safe, right? You all of a sudden become a safe person that can handle my grief. Especially you started this conversation with how many survivors feel alone and isolated because they feel like their friends have fallen away. But really, if you're a person who's willing just to sit in that with the survivor, you all of a sudden become very safe to them. And that can be life-saving. You and I both know that.
Well, the other interesting point about that is when there's some consistency to that, it builds trust, and building trust lets you share your innermost, darkest pains and sorrows. And I have noticed that people who have a few consecutive people calling them, just checking in, I'm going to swing by today with water, whatever. Yeah. It lets you feel safe with that person. And the other thing, Jill, is when we're in this experience, as you get different friends. Your friends change.
You do.
And sometimes out of the blue, there's someone that now is walking with you who you didn't know before. And now you're beginning to open up and trust the conversation with people. And I think that's also very special. I don't want people to think, well, you have to know the person, be close family and friends to be able to share part of that grief.
It's a different mindset for the griever too.
It is.
Just now that you said that, like I'm seeing it a little differently. So oftentimes we will hear from the bereaved of, and now I'm alone. I'm all alone. But really, you can actually gain some relationships in the
Right.
midst of this loss as well, right? So how are you seeing it? Is it because the people that you thought were going to show up for you are incapable of showing up for you? I'm not going to say that they didn't show up for you, because in my experience, that isn't usually the case. They're just not capable of showing up for you in the way that you need them to. And that's painful. And it does make us feel lonely, but it is amazing. I love what you just said. Oftentimes it's those that you least expect that come into your life and reach out a hand and get you through this
Right.
time, 2 years, 3 years. And they become very, very, very valuable relationships for you.
Yeah, very special. And I have a special needs son, Joey, and we talk about these things in the abstract because he doesn't understand complex ideas. But this is what he says to me: things change, Mom. Things change. So when we talk about friends and family and Eric passing away and whatever, he just calmly says things change.
But Marianne, really, isn't it that simple?
Yes,
we make it complicated. Joey's got it. Like,
he's
isn't
got
it
it.
really that simple? Like, we create a narrative and we create a story and we create this whole ideal as to why, our best friend, the cubicle next to us couldn't show up for us, didn't show up for this for us. And we don't really know what the real reason is.
We don't know.
Right? Things change. Oh, I love Joey.
Isn't that
Words of
great?
wisdom from that boy.
I know. Well,
Always.
Jill, let me ask you as we wrap this up,
Yeah.
any final thoughts for people wanting to support loss survivors?
I think you kind of said it all. I think there are different stages. And so I just invite support systems to realize that it could be at first during the intense first 3 months, 6 months of grief that person can't breathe. That person's just trying to remember to eat food, to chew food, just trying to stay alive. And then in 6 months after, a year after, 2 years after, we're in a different place. And so keep trying and just remember that I want to be where he or she is in that moment. And maybe they're capable of a different type of relationship with me now. And maybe instead of asking, what can I do for you? You just call and say, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. That's perfect, Jill. Thank you so much. Enjoy the weather up there. I hope things work out with the house. It's a beautiful place.
From Colorado.
Yay. Well, thank you for sharing with us
Absolutely.
today, Jill, and we will talk soon.
Good luck, you guys. I love Eric's house. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Bye,
We'll
sweetie.
talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.